In 2024, an autonomous drone was hanging in total darkness, more than 5 miles beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, streaming live video back to a research vessel floating on the waves above. For hours, the footage had shown nothing but silt, pressure, and the occasional flicker of a bioluminescent creature drifting past the lens like a faint star. Routine. Boring, even. And then the feed froze. Not cut out. Froze. The image locked into a single black frame, as if the camera had descended into a pocket of pure nothingness where light and signal simply stopped existing. The scientists in the control room leaned in. Someone reached for the comms. And in the exact moment the feed came back to life, something passed in front of the lens. It was translucent, roughly the size of a person. It had no fins, no limbs, no visible means of propulsion, and yet it moved with unmistakable, deliberate intention, gliding just meters from the camera. As it crossed through the drone's light beam, its surface shimmered, almost as if it were reacting to being seen. And then it was gone. No trace, no turbulence. The feed dropped for exactly 4 minutes. When the mission leader, an expert in both marine biology and electrophysiology, finally reviewed what the drone had recorded and then analyzed the residue it brought back to the surface, he said only 3 words: beyond comprehension. That footage, and everything scientists learned from what it left behind, is now reportedly in the hands of researchers and officials across multiple countries. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why. Because what they captured in the Puerto Rico Trench isn't a new fish. It isn't a bigger squid. It's evidence of something that challenges the line between biology and geology, between a living thing and a machine, between life as we've defined it and something that runs on a different set of rules entirely. A gravity anomaly that shouldn't exist. A rhythmic pulse repeating every 9 minutes from the bottom of the abyss. 6 separate research teams whose hard drives were wiped clean, not damaged erased. A creature that leaves behind residue that reacts to electricity. And a final signal that came from deeper than any instrument humanity has ever placed in the ocean. This is the story of the Puerto Rico Trench. And to understand why one drone's 4-minute blackout has quietly rattled marine scientists on 3 continents, you have to start with a single, uncomfortable fact. More human beings have flown to the moon than have descended to the deepest point on Earth. We have detailed maps of the surface of Mars. We have photographed the far side of the moon. We have rovers crawling across alien deserts, hundreds of millions of miles away. And yet, the deepest trenches of our own planet, the environments sitting a few miles beneath ships we sail every single day, remain more unexplored than the surface of any world in our solar system. We have visited the bottom of the ocean fewer times than we've visited another celestial body. And of all the places down there in the dark, few are stranger, older, or more quietly unsettling than the trench that runs along the northern edge of Puerto Rico. Because Puerto Rico is not the island you think it is. From the surface, it's a postcard. Warm water, white sand, the kind of place cruise ships stop for an afternoon. But that image hides one of the most extreme concentrations of geology and biology anywhere on the planet. On a single island, you can find mountains, deserts, rainforests, subterranean cave systems, and bioluminescent bays that glow electric blue when you disturb the water at night. It is a place where the Earth seems to be showing off. And its single most remarkable feature isn't on the island at all. It's just offshore, to the north, plunging straight down into the dark. The Puerto Rico Trench reaches a depth of 27,480 feet. That's over 5 miles straight down the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. To put that in human terms, if you took Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, and dropped it into the trench, the summit would still be more than a mile underwater. There would be no peak breaking the surface. The whole mountain would simply vanish. And the reason the trench exists at all is a slow-motion collision happening beneath your feet. Right there, the North American plate is being forced downward beneath the Caribbean plate, a process called subduction, one of the most violent geological engines on the planet. It generates earthquakes. It generates tsunamis. And according to researchers who've studied the region, it generates something else. Strange acoustic anomalies, low-frequency sounds that have been recorded even along the island's southern coast, miles from the trench itself. Depth and tectonics alone would make the Puerto Rico Trench remarkable, but that's not what draws scientists back to this stretch of ocean decade after decade. What draws them back is the thing that doesn't make sense. Because in the 1970s, before anyone was chasing pulses or ghostly footage, geophysicists noticed something about the Puerto Rico Trench that has never been fully explained, and it starts with gravity. Gravity is supposed to be the one constant you can count on. Drop an object and it accelerates toward the Earth at a predictable rate everywhere on the planet, always. Except here. In the 1970s, scientists measuring the gravitational field over the trench recorded something they initially assumed had to be an equipment error. Objects in freefall weren't accelerating the way the math said they should. The gravitational pull in this specific patch of ocean was inexplicably weaker than anywhere else on Earth. The instruments returned a gravity anomaly of negative 380 milligaules, one of the most extreme negative readings ever documented anywhere on the surface of this planet. And a negative anomaly that large means one thing: something down there is throwing off the numbers. Either there's a strange absence of mass where there should be mass, or the structure of the seafloor in this region is unlike anywhere else on Earth. The geophysicist Peter Molnar, among others, suggested the answer might lie in something dense hidden beneath the surface, a slab of heavy ancient rock, ultramafic material dragged down by the subduction zone. Others proposed buried metallic ore deposits. Others still argued it was simply the residue of an old, complex tectonic history folding in on itself. Every theory explained part of the anomaly. None of them explained all of it, not its size, not its breadth, and not why it has persisted, stable and stubborn, for as long as we've been able to measure it. And here's where the story starts to turn from geology into something harder to categorize. Because the gravity wasn't the only thing behaving strangely around the trench. Marine biologists tracking whale migrations through the region began noticing patterns that made no sense. Certain species, following ancient routes their ancestors had used for millennia, would approach the trench and then begin looping, circling erratically, breaking formation, behaving as though something in the water was interfering with the internal compass that had guided their kind for millions of years. And some of them, according to the tracking data, entered the airspace above the trench and simply never emerged on the other side. Then came the vibrations. Submersibles operated by institutions as respected as Woods Hole and NOAA recorded low-frequency vibrations rising out of the trench that didn't match any known tectonic profile. Not an earthquake, not the grind of the plates, something else, something with a rhythm to it. For years, all of this sat in separate files, in separate labs, filed under coincidence. A gravity fluke here, a whale anomaly there, a vibration nobody could source. And then, in 2019, scientists decided to actually listen. And the moment they did, the story stopped being a collection of coincidences and became something a lot of them are still afraid to say out loud. In 2019, a network of passive hydrophones, deep-sea microphones, designed to listen and record without emitting a sound of their own, was deployed along the eastern ridge of the Puerto Rico Trench. The goal was long-term acoustic monitoring. Just listen to the deep for months on end and build a baseline of what the abyss actually sounds like. For weeks, the recordings were exactly what you'd expect. The low, endless hum of the ocean. The distant songs of whales carrying for hundreds of miles through the water. The occasional tremor of the seabed shifting, a sound one researcher described as the eerie groan of the earth turning over in its sleep. Normal, baseline. Boring in the way good science is often supposed to be boring. And then, in early 2020, one of the hydrophones, the one deepest in the abyss, picked up something that was not boring at all. A pulse. Not a random noise, not a one-time event, a rhythmic pulsation, precise and repeating, firing once every 9 minutes and lasting a full 45 seconds each time. 9 minutes of silence. 45 seconds of pulse. 9 minutes of silence. 45 seconds of pulse. Over and over, with a regularity that machinery would envy. And it wasn't only sound. Every time the pulse fired, the instruments registered sharp fluctuations in electromagnetic readings, an electrical component, riding along with the acoustic one. Whatever was making this sound wasn't just vibrating the water. It was doing something to the electromagnetic field around it. The researchers ran through every explanation they had. Tectonic activity? The rhythm was too precise, and there was no matching seismic signature. Geological venting? Wrong profile entirely. Human equipment? A stray sonar ping from a passing vessel or submarine? The pulse was directional and focused. It resembled sonar, yes, but it was moving, tracking. It traveled along the depth axis of the trench, as if the source of the sound were following the trench itself, patrolling it, moving through the dark with purpose. There is a phrase that started appearing in the internal reports around this time. The researchers, trying to describe something that behaved like a sonar emission but carried the signature of a living organism, began using the term biologically modulated sonar. Sonar, produced by something alive. And then the data went quiet. Not the pulse kept going. The people went quiet. The recordings, the analysis, the whole discovery stayed contained within a small circle of researchers. It was not published, it was not announced. It was, for reasons that were never fully explained, kept classified. Which raises the obvious question. If something down there was producing a rhythmic, electrically charged, sonar-like pulse, something alive, then what was it? The trench is home to creatures we already know about, creatures adapted to one of the most hostile environments on Earth. So the first, most reasonable assumption was that this pulse belonged to one of them. Some strange but ultimately explainable animal. To rule that out, scientists had to take a hard look at what actually lives down there. And what they found was a world that felt less like Earth and more like another planet. Descend past the reach of sunlight and the Puerto Rico Trench becomes an environment almost impossible for the human mind to hold. The pressure at the bottom exceeds 1,000 times what you feel standing on a beach, enough to crush a submarine hull like an aluminum can, enough that every machine sent down there is essentially a fortress built to survive, being squeezed by the entire weight of the ocean. There is no light. Not dim light. No light. A darkness so complete that the creatures living in it have, in many cases, abandoned eyes altogether. And yet, it is not empty. Far from it. Down in that crushing dark, scientists have documented giant isopods, armored arthropods, relatives of the humble woodlouse you'd find under a rock in your garden, except grown to the size of dinner plates. They creep across the seafloor as scavengers, feeding on the endless rain of organic material drifting down from the sunlit world miles above, a slow snowfall of death that feeds the entire abyss. There are octopuses so translucent, they're nearly invisible, glass-like bodies that vanish against the black water, camouflaged not by color but by sheer absence. There are jellyfish that carry their own light bioluminescent, ghostly things that drift through the dark with a soft, eerie glow, like floating lanterns, like creatures carrying their own private stars through a universe that has never known the sun. And there are corals, in a place with no sunlight, surviving through a process called chemosynthesis. Instead of drawing energy from light the way every plant on the surface does, they draw it from chemistry, from the methane and hydrogen sulfide seeping up out of cold vents in the seafloor. Life, quietly rewriting its own rulebook, thriving on the poison of the deep earth. Scientists will tell you these creatures may hold the key to understanding the origins of life itself, how living things can arise and survive without the sun, which is precisely the question we ask when we search for life on other worlds. But for all their strangeness, all of these creatures had one thing in common when researchers compared them against the pulse. Not one of them could have made it. Not the isopods, not the octopuses, not the jellyfish, not the coral. None of them produce a directional, electrically charged, 45-second sonar pulse on a 9-minute cycle. Every known inhabitant of the trench was, one by one, ruled out. Which left the researchers staring at a very uncomfortable conclusion. Something was down there, something that produced that pulse, and it was not on any list of animals we had ever cataloged. Something in the trench was hiding, and between 2021 and 2023, whatever it was, appeared to start hiding on purpose. Because in those 3 years, the trench stopped giving up its data. Between 2021 and 2023, no fewer than 6 independent research initiatives funded and staffed by universities across Europe, Japan, and the United States reported the same bizarre problem. Data from the deepest zones of the trench was vanishing, not corrupting, not glitching, vanishing. Entire datasets, weeks of readings on seismic activity and water composition, simply gone. At first, it was written off the way these things always are. Equipment failure, the brutal reality of operating hardware in the most punishing environment on the planet. But then the devices started coming back up. And when the technicians examined them, they found something that equipment failure doesn't explain. The hard drives weren't broken. They were blank, wiped. The magnetic storage that should have held gigabytes of data showed complete magnetic erasure, as though every bit had been reached in and neatly deleted. And it wasn't only the primary drives. Backup transponders' independent systems designed specifically to survive when everything else fails either refused to activate at all or came back transmitting garbled, meaningless strings of characters. Redundancy after redundancy, all of it defeated. A technician on a Belgian research team described it in a way that stuck with everyone who read the report. He said it was as if something pulsed right through the electronics. Not damage cancellation, a complete erasure, as though someone or something had deliberately wiped their work. Not damage, cancellation. And here's the part that made the random failure theory collapse entirely. When engineers pulled the diagnostic logs from the recovered devices, the machines had never even approached their failure thresholds. The temperatures were within range, the pressure was within tolerance. The salinity, the voltage, every environmental variable, the hardware monitored, all of it was normal, right up until the moment the data ceased to exist. These weren't machines that broke under strain. These were machines that were working perfectly, right up until something reached through them and switched their memory off. 6 teams, 3 continents, the same impossible signature. And the theories that started circulating in the private channels of the scientific community were the kind of theories careers are not built on. Some wondered, half seriously, whether the trench itself was so ancient, so isolated, so cut off from the rest of the world for so many millions of years, that it had developed something like a resistance to being explored an environment that fought back. Others went further, into territory that gets a scientist laughed out of a conference, an unknown force, an intelligence. Something that did not want to be measured, and had the means to make sure it wasn't. For most of these researchers, that was where it stopped. A mystery too strange to publish, too well documented to ignore, quietly shelved. But some people don't shelve things. And in 2024, a coalition of them decided that if the trench wouldn't let us record it from a distance, they would send something down into it, something purpose-built to go deeper, see clearer, and stay silent enough that maybe, just maybe, whatever was down there wouldn't notice it coming. The 2024 mission was unlike anything attempted in the trench before. It brought together an unusual coalition. NOAA, the U.S. agency responsible for the oceans and atmosphere. The Schmidt Ocean Institute, one of the most advanced private ocean research organizations in the world. And a private biotech firm whose interest in the trench was, notably, never fully explained. 3 very different organizations pooling their resources for one shot at the dark. At the center of the mission was a machine called the Pelagia X7. It was a state-of-the-art autonomous underwater drone, engineered from the ground up for exactly this environment. It was built for silent navigation, designed to slip through the water without the noise and disturbance that might scare off whatever the earlier missions had been chasing. It carried advanced sensors rated for the most extreme depths on Earth, and it fed a real-time video stream back to the surface. Its objective was simple to state and terrifying to attempt: descend beyond 8,000 meters into the deepest reaches of the trench and find out what was down there. For a long time, the descent was exactly what you'd expect. The live feed showed vast plains of silt stretching into the dark, the drone's lights carving a small tunnel of visibility through water that had never seen light before. Occasionally, a bioluminescent creature would drift past like a faint star, glow briefly in the beam, and vanish. The control room settled into the rhythm of a long dive, and then the feed froze. It was the same phenomenon, at a scale no one was ready for. The image locked. The drone, by every sensor reading, was still descending, still functional, still transmitting, and yet the picture had dropped into an invisible pocket of nothingness. A void where the signal seemed to be swallowed whole. The room went silent. And in the instant the feed re-established, the thing appeared. It came into the light from the edge of the frame, a form, ethereal and translucent, passing just meters from the camera lens. It was unlike any known marine species, unlike anything in any database, unlike anything the biologists in that room had studied in their entire careers. It had no fins, no limbs, no appendages of any kind, no visible means of propulsion whatsoever. And yet it moved smoothly, purposefully, with what everyone who watched the footage independently described using the same unsettling word: intention. As it passed through the drone's beam, its surface shimmered, the light rippling across it in a way that looked less like reflection and more like reaction, as if the creature had registered the light touching it and responded. And as it moved, the drone's sensors caught something even stranger than the sight of it. Faint electrical signals were coming off the thing. Not the random electrochemistry of muscle and nerve that every animal produces, but something patterned. Something one analyst could only describe as unknown biological circuitry. Then it was gone. It didn't swim away. It didn't flee. It simply moved out of the frame and left no trace behind, no wake, no disturbance in the silt, nothing to prove it had ever been there at all, and the feed dropped for exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes of black. And then the drone, still intact, still functioning, resumed transmitting silt and darkness as though nothing had happened. The expedition leader, and remember, this was a person with expertise in both marine biology and the study of biological electricity, precisely the two fields you'd need to even begin to interpret what the drone had seen, reviewed the footage, and reached for the only phrase that fit: beyond comprehension. The footage, according to reports, was quickly distributed to scientists and officials across the world. But the footage, as extraordinary as it was, wasn't even the most important thing the Pelagia X7 brought back. Because when the drone was recovered and hauled back onto the deck, someone noticed that its hull was not clean. There was a residue on it, a film. Something the creature or the void it had passed through had left behind. And what happened when they put that residue under analysis is the part of this story that turned a strange sighting into something genuinely unprecedented. The residue analysis was led by a marine biologist named Dr. Elise Ferrer, and from the first moment her team examined the substance, it refused to behave the way biological material is supposed to behave. It clung to the drone's hull, but not as a simple biofilm. Not the way algae or bacteria coat a surface. It adhered as something more organized, a complex, interactive layer, as if the residue were less a smear and more a structure. So they tested it. And the test they ran was almost mundane in its simplicity. They applied a basic electric charge. What happened next is the reason this footage is now sitting in labs on multiple continents. The residue responded. Under the microscope, in real time, the substance reacted to the electrical stimulus. Tiny filaments formed within it, stretching outward like threads, reaching for something, holding for a moment, and then withdrawing and vanishing. It didn't just conduct the charge, it answered it. The movement looked, in the words of the team, deliberate. It looked alive in a way that defied the definitions of biology they had spent their careers building. So they sequenced it. They ran the residue through genetic analysis, expecting to place it somewhere on the tree of life, some branch, some relative, some clue to what it was. And the sequencing came back, missing the answers. The substance lacked many of the fundamental biological markers that define life as we know it. The molecular signatures that every living thing on Earth shares, the common inheritance that ties a human to a bacterium to a redwood tree, were, in large part, simply not there. And then they found the mechanism. Buried in the residue's structure was a system for handling energy unlike anything in a textbook. Dr. Ferrer's team identified what they called electrolytic vesicles, microscopic sacs, capable of storing and discharging ions, generating their own energy through raw electrical activity. This was not an organism that ate. This was not an organism that breathed in any sense we'd recognize. This was something that appeared to power itself electrically, possibly even charging itself by manipulating the electromagnetic fields around it, drawing energy the way a solar panel draws light, except from the invisible electric texture of the deep earth. Think about what that implies. Every form of life you have ever known traces its energy back, ultimately, to the sun. Plants capture sunlight. Animals eat the plants, or eat the animals that ate the plants. Even the chemosynthetic coral of the trench is running on the chemistry of a planet warmed and shaped by its star. But this residue, this thing appeared to have evolved in complete isolation from the sun's energy. It had adapted to the crushing, lightless, electrically active bottom of the trench in a way that no surface-dwelling life form could even fathom. It didn't fit into our paradigm of biology. It looked, for all the world, like an entirely different paradigm. A second, parallel answer to the question of how to be alive, one that Earth had apparently been quietly running for millions of years at the bottom of the Atlantic, while the rest of us looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. And that reframed everything. The gravity anomaly, the whales that lost their way, the 9-minute pulse with its electromagnetic signature, the 6 research teams whose electronics were canceled, a form of life that runs on electricity that manipulates electromagnetic fields would leave exactly those fingerprints. Suddenly, the coincidences weren't coincidences, they were symptoms. Symptoms of something living down there that interacts with the world through the one medium we'd never thought to watch, the electromagnetic field itself. There was only one thing left to do. Go back, find it again, prove it. So in late 2024, a second mission descended into the trench, and what it found, or rather what it failed to find, is the moment this entire story finally pays off. The second mission was built to hunt. Where the first had been designed to observe quietly, this one was designed to provoke. The team brought autonomous drones equipped not just with cameras and sensors, but with enhanced sonar arrays and the ability to emit electric stimuli, because if this thing responded to electricity, if the residue reached toward a charge, then maybe a carefully placed pulse could coax the creature itself out of the dark. They would knock on the door of the abyss and see what answered. They swept the trench methodically. Sonar pulse after sonar pulse rolled out into the black. Electric stimuli fired into the water at the depths where the creature had first appeared. Hour after hour, the drones combed the deepest zones, sensors straining for any flicker, any shimmer, any faint electrical whisper, and nothing came. The silt lay undisturbed. The water stayed empty. The confidence that had launched the mission slowly curdled into doubt, and then into something close to defeat. Whatever they had seen the first time, it was not going to perform on command. It was gone. And then, when they had nearly given up, the deep-sea microphones caught it. The same frequency, the same signature, a near-perfect echo of the pulse from the very first encounter, the one recorded back in early 2020, unmistakable, unrepeatable, and unquestionably the same source. The creature hadn't left, it had answered, but not from where they were looking. Because when the team traced the pulse back to its origin, the number on the screen didn't make sense. The signal was coming from more than 8,400 meters below the surface, deeper than any instrument had ever recorded a signal in that trench. Down in the shadow of the massive tectonic fault, where the North American plate grinds beneath the Caribbean plate and the crust of the earth folds down into the mantle, and the signature was delayed, stretched, arriving in a way that suggested it had been transmitted from even farther down than the source they'd pinpointed, as though the thing they were listening to was itself only an echo of something deeper, something farther below than anyone had dared to imagine. They had gone down there to capture it, to provoke it, corner it, prove it. And in that final moment, the roles quietly, terrifyingly reversed. The creature had let itself be seen the first time. It had left a piece of itself on the drone's hull, almost like a calling card. And when humanity came back with sonar and electric bait to drag it into the light, it declined, and then, from a depth we cannot reach, with instruments it can apparently switch off at will, it sent back the one signal it knew they would recognize, as if to say, "I know you're still listening. I'm still here. I'm deeper than you can follow, and I chose to show you what I showed you." So, let's be clear about what they actually captured in the Puerto Rico Trench. They did not capture a creature in a net. They captured something far more disturbing than that. They captured footage of a translucent, propulsionless form that moved with intention and reacted to being seen. They captured residue that responds to electricity, grows filaments that reach and retreat, and carries none of the genetic markers that bind together every other living thing on Earth. They captured a 9-minute pulse that has been patrolling the abyss since before we knew to listen for it. They captured proof of an organism that runs on electricity, manipulates the electromagnetic field, and may be the reason gravity reads wrong, whales lose their way, and 6 teams of scientists watch their hard drives erase themselves from the inside out. And most of all, they captured the realization that we are not the ones doing the discovering. The gravity anomaly is real. The negative 380 milligauls is on record. The whales really do break formation and vanish over the trench. Woods Hole and NOAA really did record vibrations that match no known source. The pulse is real, the electromagnetic fluctuations are real, the wiped drives are real, the chemosynthetic corals and the glass octopuses and the dinner plate isopods are real. The subduction zone grinding beneath the island is real, and the fault it hides is real, and the 27,480 feet of black water above it is as real as the ground you're standing on. And somewhere down there, past the reach of every drone, every submarine, every instrument humanity has ever built deeper than 8,400 meters, in the dark and the cold and the crushing patient pressure of the deepest trench in the Atlantic Ocean, something is still pulsing. Every 9 minutes, 45 seconds at a time. It has been doing it since long before we arrived. It watched a machine come down into its world, and it let that machine watch back. It left us a piece of itself, almost like a message we still can't fully read. And when we returned to take more, it slipped deeper into the earth and sent up a signal to remind us of exactly how little we understand. More people have walked on the moon than have stood at the bottom of that trench. We have mapped the craters of other worlds, while an entirely different form of life, older than the theory of evolution, powered by a force we didn't think biology could use, was quietly waiting 5 miles beneath our shipping lanes the entire time. They went looking for a new animal. What they captured was the end of the assumption that we know what life on this planet even is. The footage exists. The residue is in a lab right now. The signal is still coming from somewhere below the deepest number our instruments can hold. And the only question the scientists who've seen all of it keep circling back to, the one none of them can answer, the one that should leave anyone speechless, isn't what is it? It's this. Had they already disturbed something that was never meant to be found? The trench is still down there. It is still pulsing. And by every available measure, it is still listening.